Welcome, everybody, into another edition of Warm Weather Fans, the Sunbelt Podcast. My name is Brian Stone, joined as always by Zeke Palermo, and glad to have you, Aikman Chambers, here to talk about everything going on with Appalachian State. We got a lot to get to from that side of things, a lot of coaching news, a lot of musical coaching chairs, and I think we should talk about a lot of what went into the decision making, both from the coaches that pursued the individual positions and where the schools kind of stood with everything. But before we get into all that, Zeke, how's it going? And then we'll go to Aikman. How's it going? And then we'll go ahead and get into everything.
I'm doing well. It was a really exciting weekend of college football. The committee finally got at least something right. Playoff committee did by keeping Alabama out in favor of SMU. There's still a long way to go, and you can't expect. This is un-Sunbelt related, but you can't expect the first iteration to be the right one of this playoff model. But it feels like we're still in a very lose-lose situation where no one is happy ever with it. And it predated me a little bit, but that was not my understanding of like the BCS, or, you were either in or you were out. And if you were out, it kind of should have played better. Overall, I'm good though. Aikman, thanks for being here. How are you?
Guys, thanks for having me once again. I really do appreciate it. And I'm going to piggyback off what Zeke said with the college football playoff real quick. I'm glad SMU got in. That was a great game last night against Clemson in the ACC championship game. I know people obviously going to be upset about Alabama being out, your SEC hardcore people, but I think the committee got it right. Again, there's no perfect way to do this. You're not going to make everybody happy. We know that. But all in all, congrats to them. But thanks again to you guys for having me on. It's been a busy week in and around Boone with the news coming for Appalachian State. I want to tip my hat to Marshall, say congratulations to the Thundering Herd on a well-done season. Getting your coach out in the process of winning a conference championship is pretty impressive. So when it's not a move up the ladder, where it's not like a move up to a bigger school where you're staying and just going from East Division to West Division. I never thought I'd see anything like it, but here we are.
Zeke, going kind of piggybacking off of what you said about Aikman, and I don't know if you could speak to this too, but I am old enough to remember a lot of the BCS stuff. And the number one thing that always comes to my mind, kind of what you were talking about with that, was 2004, the year that Auburn, I believe, went undefeated and got left out because it was it was basically we named the championship game and there was no playoff. So that always stuck with me, that like the Jason Campbell, Cadillac Williams, Ronnie Brown team got, they unfairly got left out, but it was a 2-team, playoff basically by that point. So it was unfair. I was just glad that the committee kept SMU and Indiana in, because those were the 2 teams where I was afraid that they were going to pull some shenanigans and try to sneak, an Alabama. I grew up, my dad is a South Carolina alum. I didn't even really think South Carolina belonged in that mix, even though like I knew they came on strong at the end of the season, but there were just, frankly, you can't lose the LSU game, things like that. So I was just glad that I felt like we got the 12 most deserving, most qualified teams in the playoffs. So that was obviously huge. But let's start talking about the Sunbelt Championship game from last night before we get into the coaching musical chairs. So I looked it up. We have not had a competitive Sunbelt Championship game technically since 2021. It's been basically 3 straight blowouts with, Louisiana, Troy, and now we have Marshall just kind of owning, everything at this point. Obviously Chandler Fields gets hurt, and that kind of did Louisiana in, because, Daniel Beal is a freshman and didn't quite seem ready for the spotlight, to be quite honest. And there's a lot that goes into that. But it reminded me a lot of the quote from the first Fast and Furious movie where Paul Walker goes, "I almost had you," and Vin Diesel goes, "You never had your car." That's kind of how I felt about Louisiana. They even if you had a prime, Levi Lewis walk through the door and start for the Cajuns, it didn't feel like they were going to win this game to me. I don't know how you guys felt about it, but Zeke, if you want to give kind of your initial thoughts, and then we'll go to Aikman and see what he kind of thought about it.
Yeah, the quarterback situation was obviously put Louisiana in a situation where no matter how good they could have played, it ultimately wasn't going to matter. Obviously, Beal's first college snaps, so I don't expect him to go out there and play like Offensive Player of the Year Ben Wooldridge, but I was very discouraged by what I did see out of him. It was very panicky, and when he not once did I see him step up in a pocket, and anytime he had the opportunity to throw, it was well off target. So with that said, Louisiana was in a position where like an unwinnable position to start with. However, it didn't get the support it needed. It allowed 31 points, far too many to allow Marshall to score. And they let Braylon Braxton play really out of his mind. This guy has, over the past several weeks, really since he got the starting job, proved that he is probably the second best quarterback in the conference, at least this season, possibly behind Wooldridge, and you could even argue that he might have surpassed him. And the Offensive Player of the Year award just kind of went based on games played. It was a tough situation for Louisiana. I was very adamant that Marshall was going to win this game. I was very certain of it. And I'm willing to give myself a mulligan because of the quarterback situation, but that's not to dismiss what Marshall did. They played very well. We saw Mike Green really disrupt the game, even without, I don't think he recorded many tackles or sacks, but you could see, and they pointed out on the broadcast several times, that he was drawing so much attention from the offensive line that it opened up the run game for the non-AJ Turner running backs. Brian, I know you said that was going to be a big factor in this game, whether or not AJ Turner played. It didn't end up mattering because Ethan Payne and the bevy of running backs they have there. And it also just allowed other guys other guys to feast on that defensive line.
Aikman?
Honestly, like Zeke said, I thought Marshall was going to win the whole way. I've been a fan of Braylon Braxton since earlier in the year when App went to Huntington and Braylon Braxton combined for 270 yards of offense against us. I mean, he threw for like 129, 130, ran for $140 and a couple of scores, threw 3 touchdowns in that 52-37 win against us. And I said then, this kid is going to be really good. I was like, all the attributes are there for him to be a really good quarterback. And, that I just thought going into yesterday's game with the quarterback situation at Louisiana, with the way that was, especially as we saw it play out last night in the game. And to me, Marshall has been the team all year. I know Louisiana is the one everybody's looked at, but I've thought, honestly, when the cards were down and the chips were on the table, Marshall was a team I did not want to play. If I was anybody in the Western Division, Marshall was the team out of the East I did not want to play.
Yeah, we were really pounding the drum early for Braylon Braxton to come in and play because, frankly, we saw what they had, or I guess what they didn't have in Cole Pennington last season, and it was ugly. And when they started off this season with Stone Earl, I think we all just kind of got together. Zeke, Matt, and I got together collectively and was just like, this guy just doesn't have it. Like he's not going to bring the added dimension that this team needs. I said all year that I thought Marshall was the second best team in the conference, and frankly, from what I saw on Saturday, I was wrong. Like they were the best. They are the best team in the conference. Like they're even better than Louisiana. I don't know. I don't know. Again, if you threw Wooldridge out there, I don't know that it changes the ultimate result. Like, I think it's a lot closer. I think it's probably in the 24-21-ish range, but I still like Braxton was just throwing dimes. I mean, that touchdown he hit, I can't remember who the receiver was. It wasn't the Braylon Brown score. Or no, it was the Braylon Brown score. The one he hit in the corner of the end zone when he just I mean, it was like a back shoulder type throw, and the corner just absolutely had no shot to get to it. I was just like, this is what it takes to win a conference title, is like big time throws like that. They were running the ball at will. They ran the ball for 222 yards as a team, including 117 from Jordan Houston, which was huge. Yeah, it just felt like they got control of this game. You had Fields go out, and then they just never really relinquished control of it. And so what you end up with is basically a rout. And I think with Wooldridge, Louisiana plays obviously a lot better and plays a lot closer of a game. But with some of the throws that Braxton was making, like I don't know in what world those corners could make plays on some of those balls. Like the first one he threw, the 37-yard touchdown to get it started, there wasn't anybody within 5-10 yards of the receiver that caught it. So like how much is Wooldridge ultimately changing the outcome of that one? And I know that Matt was calling out on the Braylon Brown touchdown that there was a push off, but I'm like, I don't know, man. Like it probably was, but ultimately, like, okay, you lose 24-3 instead of 31-3 at that point. Like I don't really understand how much that changes things. So again, I think we need to. I'm personally going to give the ultimate credit here to Charles Huff, because it is very easy when you're in this situation to let your team get distracted and say, hey, we don't know where coach is going to be like on Sunday. We don't know where any of us are going to end up. We like Zeke said, Braylon Braxton could be in the transfer portal. So I just think to keep them laser focused and locked in on this game, I obviously think it was a great job by him, but it was obviously a great job too by the players, because they could have easily looked around and said, we don't know what the motivation or whatever is. They played for themselves at that point, as well as Huff. So I give them ultimate credit for that, because they were absolutely locked in from the jump. And Zeke, like you said, Mike Green was the Sunbelt Player of the Year. He only finished with 5 tackles, 3 solo tackles, 1 sack, and 1.5 tackles for a loss. Now, obviously, they were really focused in on him, but to nullify a guy of that level and still not even come close to kind of cracking the code is, I mean, what else can you say really about Marshall's defense at this point?
Yeah, I agree that this was ultimately, don't tell Russell Westbrook I'm saying this, but this was Marshall's win more so than it was Louisiana's loss. Braxton is in the portal. He announced today, or told ESPN today. So, as I'm sure a bevy, or I already used the word bevy, a multitude, let's say, of Marshall guys are going to do over the next couple days. It's difficult because I don't know a time that we've seen a team win the conference and then look at them with so many questions looking into the next year. They're going to have a new head coach. They're going to lose probably, again, at the very least, the most exciting quarterback, most well-rounded quarterback in the conference. So I can't remember a time, and again, you guys have been around this conference longer than I, so I'll ask you, has there been a time where after the conference championship, even the day after, you look and you say, I don't know what this Marshall team's going to be next year?
That's tough, honestly.
Yeah.
We haven't seen kind of a mass exodus like this, where, it's one thing when it's 2021 Louisiana, and you knew who you were losing and who wasn't coming back, and you knew Billy Napier was out the door and all those sorts of things. But it's another thing when it's like a lot of these guys still have eligibility, and they're just all like, Huff's our coach. They could end up in Hattiesburg, or they could end up, with a P4 school elsewhere. I think it's just a different situation all around, because I obviously can't think of a time where a team won their conference championship and then let their coach go, and whether you think it's Huff didn't want the extension, or whether the school didn't want to give it to him, that's all like, up to interpretation, and really only a couple people know that at this point. But I've just never heard of a coach winning the conference and then just kind of sidestepping to another school in the same conference. Like that's hard to fathom for me.
That's the biggest thing for me too, is like the whole situation is just, it feels so awkward because again, you normally, when we've seen things like this happen before, it was Napier was gone to Florida, Drinkowitz was gone to Missouri. I mean, it's been that step up into the Power 5 venture. When this is the opposite of that, this is, you're staying in the conference, you're going to a school that's in an opposite division. There's just so many things about this that I think just feels very odd.
It's the other thing that's going to be really interesting to see, and we know that Braxton's in the portal, but we brought this up last week, Aikman. It's going to be really interesting to see how many players follow Huff, or if they do at all. Like we truly don't know at this point. Like, I'm sure the players love him. Obviously, they got up for this game, played for him. But it's going to be really interesting to see if any of those guys say, I just love Huff so much that I'll go to this team that kind of looks like, I equated it to Colorado before Deion Sanders came in, where it's like, I don't know, man. Like, there's not a lot over there. Like, you're really going to have to rebuild this thing from ground zero. And so if Braxton decides, hey, I want to be a part of that I'm sure Huff would love that, because that's a huge starting block, because frankly, Southern Miss's offensive or quarterback situation has been a mess for a while. So he would be a huge get. Now, I with NIL and everything, you don't know if like the Auburns or whatever of the world come calling, those teams that always seem to need a quarterback decide, hey, you can make some pretty good money over here. Why don't you come look at Arkansas or whoever? So there always is a lot that remains to be seen, but I just again, hats off to Huff, hats off to this team. They locked in when they absolutely needed to. 2 weeks ago they were down 17-0 at half to JMU, and their chance to make the conference title game was on the line. And from then on, they've just been kind of a well-oiled machine. I mean, it's been 6 quarters of just like Terminator level efficiency. So good job by them.
Yeah.
So do we want to transition off of this game? Like,
that's all there is to really say.
It sucks to say, but again, we've had all these conference championship games in a row that are just not really all that competitive. There's not a lot to discuss. Like, Marshall kind of was on it from the jump, and Louisiana was just kind of playing catch up the whole time. So let's go ahead and Zeke, do you have anything else before we transition?
No, it's unfortunate. It's sad.
Yeah. So I mean, I feel like we were
sad, but
we were lucky to get 18 minutes out of that conference championship game to talk about. Honestly, like I would have been shocked if we'd have got to 10. But let's start to talk about. So we talked about Huff leaving, and that's something that we've discussed kind of ad nauseum here on this podcast. And obviously he's a huge get for Southern Miss, considering what they were dealing with the Will Hall situation. Aikman, do you want to dive into the App State coaching situation? I think one of the interesting things today was that it was revealed that Purdue is not actually going to hire Tyson Helton from Western Kentucky. Again, I know this is not directly Sunbelt related, but there are a lot of dominoes that kind of fell. They're not going to get Tyson Helton from Western Kentucky. So as of today, there's no opening at Western Kentucky. So Neil Brown, who seemed like he was the shoe-in to get the job in Boone, now might be left without a job for this season. So maybe he just takes the year off, goes back to the drawing board, or he pulls a Cliff Kingsbury and goes to Thailand for a year or whatever. But, he might have a lot of free time on his hands in 2025. So do you want to kind of take us through kind of what your experience with the coaching search stuff was?
It's been a crazy week. I know that much. So many things. If you would have asked me this time last Sunday, as where we were sitting, this was pre it being announced that Sean Clark was fired. I told somebody last Saturday night after the Georgia Southern game, they asked me, they said, what percentage do you give it that Sean Clark is fired to brought back? And I said 60-40. 60 that I thought he was going to be fired, 40 that I thought he would be brought back. And I bumped up, I thought, bringing back, because I thought Hurricane Helene did make an impact on the football program this year with what he had to deal with that. Plus, I mean, slews and slews of injuries that were just misfortunate and untimely injuries. I thought the move would be if they bring him back that he's got a clean house on staff, and that would mean defensive coordinator Scott Sloan and offensive coordinator Frank Ponce would have to go out the door, and maybe they would give him one more year since he is App State through and through and bleeds black and gold. But that's not the decision they came to. It's the decision I thought would happen. Again, I gave it 60-40 that he would be fired, and that's what happened. So by the time Tuesday evening, Wednesday morning rolled around, I really thought this was going to be where Neil Brown ended up. I thought he was going to come to Boone, North Carolina. I thought he was going to trade one Mountaineer in for another, and I thought he was going to be App State's head coach. Well, then by Thursday evening into Friday, they started being rumblings that, you know, he likes that Western Kentucky job. He's a Kentucky guy, born and raised about 2 hours or so from where Western Kentucky's at. Because a lot of people thought maybe Helton was the guy Purdue would be zeroed in on for their job before Barry Odom emerged at UNLV today. And so I think when that happened, it set off a chain reaction where App started lining up these other guys they had interviewed. Loggains had been interviewed, even though the talks with Neil Brown were going on, from what I understood. I know that Casey Woods, the offensive coordinator from SMU, was a big name they were looking at. Sparky Woods' son, Sparky Woods, was a former head coach at App State right before Jerry Moore in the 80s, so that was that App State connection there. Kirby Moore was a guy that I know they apparently had a lot of interest in, the offensive coordinator at Missouri. I'm sure the Drinkwitz connection there did not hurt by any means necessary. Because if you know how App State works, they like to stay with somebody that has some sort of connection to the football program. It's kind of the way they've done in their hiring cycles. Drinkwitz was outside the box, and it worked. Drinkwitz worked. They ended up having to go outside the box, I think, because of the Neil Brown situation. It forced other dominoes to fall, and thus yesterday at 5 o'clock, when there was an emergency board of trustees meeting that was called in Boone, and then it was announced that Dowell Loggains would be the new head coach, the offensive coordinator from South Carolina. It's not the guy that if even Friday going into Saturday morning that I would have bet you, my guess would have been that it was just holding out to announce because Casey Woods has got to play the ACC championship game in Charlotte Saturday night. Then he can get up and drive on over to Boone Sunday and have some kind of formal thing done tomorrow to get this done. So it shocked me. It shocked a lot of people. A lot of people in Boone that I've talked to were surprised that this was the move they made. But again, this is the move they've made. So now we're going to see he got a 5-year deal. So it's through 2029. They're giving him time. These first few weeks with the transfer portal is going to be crucial because a lot of key contributors off of this football team has went into the transfer portal over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 days since the announcement that Sean Clark would not come back as the head coach. So I'm curious to see what he does. I mean, he had a good year this year, but you also had Lenora Sellers at quarterback, so that makes a big difference. You had a really good running back at South Carolina too. And the thing about it is with Loggains, as I look through his resume, yeah, there's a lot of NFL background coaching on his resume, but there's not a lot of stays where it goes more than 2 or 3 years. I mean, we're talking very short tenured at a lot of places. There's a few 1-year and dones at some of these places he's been. That's the thing I'm worried about a little bit, is from the standpoint of, 2 or 3 years down the road, are we looking for a new head coach because he's went right back up to the Power 5, Power 4 ranks, or is it just because he's flamed out and we're back to the football program is on a worse downward trajectory than what some people perceive it to be already under Sean Clark these last few years? I mean, I know that the Sean Clark critics are a mass and all around in our Northwest North Carolina area, especially. But I mean, again, when you look at what he done at Appalachian, I mean, 40-24 in his tenure is not horrible from a winning percentage situation, but 5-6 this year. 2 out of the last 3 years, you miss a bowl game because 2 years ago when you went 6-6, 2 of those wins were against FCS schools, and only one of those can count towards your bowl eligibility record. So it's not what the program's used to. It's not what the fan base is used to. I understand why they did it, but I'm still a little skeptical. I'm in a heavy wait and see mode. I want to see how the portal goes these next couple of weeks. I want to see, is he able to bring any of our guys back? Is he able to possibly bring, 1 or 2 transfers from South Carolina that have went in the portal the last day or two, that have connections with him on offense? What does this start to look like, and what staff does he bring with him? Because there's a guy at South Carolina that is a former Mountaineer that is the tight ends coach at South Carolina, and Sean Elliott, former Georgia State head coach. And I think it makes too much sense to try and bring Sean Elliott to Boone with him on his staff. It's an App State move to make. App State loves making these kinds of moves. You can make him the offensive line, tight ends coach, assistant head coach, whatever you want to do, since he's been a head coach at the Sun Belt level. I would like to at least see if he's able to bring Sean Elliott with him to Boone.
Mm-hmm. That was something I was going to ask about, because a name I was surprised we didn't hear anything about was Sean Elliott. Now, granted, I have a bias here because I am a Georgia State guy, but that felt like at least worth an interview. He had a very limited ceiling when he was at Georgia State, but he was not fired. He left on his own terms there. So I'm glad you brought up the Sean Elliott part, because that was a name I was shocked didn't come up at all in these conversations during the search. Do I have that wrong? Was that ever brought up?
No, I'd never talked to anybody that mentioned Sean Elliott's name outright in this process. Part of me believes Sean Elliott just got tired of being a head coach in this landscape of college football, especially at the group of 5 level, where you're a ever-turning factory where it's a different team year in and year out, and just because you recruit out of high school doesn't necessarily mean anything as much anymore. And I think, like a lot of guys, whether it be college football or college basketball, I think Sean Elliott found that life is just a positions coach and an assistant coach be a lot less of a headache and still make a pretty good living at being able to do it. But I think he would be the perfect kind of guy to bring to Boone if Loggains is able to maneuver it right. I think, give him that associate head coach, assistant head coach title, offensive line, tight ends, group 2 or 3, stipends, salary maneuvers in here together, because I think a guy like Sean Elliott is going to help with his connection and, love for the university that he has from being a former Mountaineer at playing for Jerry Moore. I just think it makes too much sense not to have Sean Elliott and Boone if they can make it happen.
Well, the one thing that I had a question about, and I guess this could be rhetorical because we'll never know, but Zeke, didn't you say one of the big things, and again, I know that the title would be different, he wouldn't be the head coach in this case. Didn't you say one of the things about him coaching at Georgia State was that he was still living in Columbia or in South Carolina and wouldn't relocate to Atlanta? So the thing that I would be interested in is, does he end up, if he gets an assistant head coach title, does he end up having to, is that on the table? Does he have to relocate to Boone full time and say, hey, I'm in this for the long haul, right? Because Zeke said one of the things was his family really loved living there and frankly just didn't want to move to Atlanta, which I totally get, but also there come a level of responsibility that you kind of have to assume when you're an assistant head coach, or even by extension an offensive line coach or a tight ends coach or whatever his title may be. So again, I don't know that we have an answer to that, because that'll be something that remains to be seen, but that's something else that it kind of needs to be factored in as well.
We won't know that. That's something that's probably going to remain in Sean Elliott's head until the end of time that, us outsiders will ever get to know. But as an anecdote, the first time I ever spoke with Sean Elliott, it was in a press conference, and I just asked him what his offseason looked like. And, he joked that he spent the whole summer on his boat. And if you know anything about Georgia, there's not many lakes in the Atlanta area. And the ones that are there are either haunted or all man-made and all haunted. So based on my interactions with him, it would seem that Boone would be a better fit for him than Atlanta, family and lifestyle wise. But again, that's something that's going to remain internal up in his head until someone asks him about it.
Yeah, I think, moving to Boone, North Carolina is such a much more laid back atmosphere than, Atlanta it's not even in comparison that you can put the two together unless you ask a, lifelong local or semi-local, somebody like me who's lived near Boone. I'm about 35, 40 minutes from Boone, right down the mountain, and has seen it explode in my lifetime from a place where you could easily travel through to now it's like bumper to bumper traffic all the time. And you're like, what has happened to this mountain town? Because it's just exploded over the last 10 years. But yes, it would, I think you could get him and his family to move to Boone. I think it's a totally different animal to move to Boone than it would be to move to Atlanta. I think deep down, I guarantee you it's at least a conversation that's at least been thought about. If you're Loggains, how do you not have that thought or conversation to be like, Sean, you played here, you coached here. I mean, this place, they know you, they love you. I mean, it makes too much sense not to at least pick up the phone and shoot him a text and be like, would you be interested if I can make it happen?
Aikman, let me ask you about this because obviously Scott Sloan was the defensive coordinator at Georgia Southern before he went back to Appalachian State. Tell me if this was always and again, I've watched a handful of App State games this year. You're much more plugged in kind of with their program than I am. Tell me if this sounds familiar, because this was always the issue that we had with Sloan at Southern, especially toward the end of the Lunsford era, was defensively, his entire scheme, and I know that you could say this about a lot of defensive coordinators, is solely predicated on getting pressure with like four guys, because defensively it all works in kind of levels when you are getting consistent pressure and you have a pass rusher that you feel like, hey, maybe not on a Mike Green level, but hey, that guy's going to go get after the quarterback. And when it doesn't happen that way, the secondary has a lot of communication issues, was something that I saw a lot at Southern, like specifically in the safety spots. We had a lot of safeties getting lost, especially when, if you're playing too high and a guy runs a post between the two safeties. I mean, we had a bunch of times where there would just be nobody near the receiver and both the safeties are pointing at each other like it's the Spider-Man meme, being like, no, that was yours, not me. No. So tell me if that sounds familiar from a defensive experience, because that was kind of what got I think Sloan might have been retained if defensively they didn't look so bad in Lunsford's final season.
The defense has been a spot all year that has just underperformed and underwhelmed. I mean, I can't count to you the times where, it was missed tackles. Just tackling was an issue, I felt like, this year. Guys were not tackling well. The secondary, the miscommunication in the secondary was horrendous many games this year, whether it was safeties getting lost, whether it was corners taking bad angles on receivers running routes. I mean, and then the pass rush situation, 3 or 4 guys rushing toward the quarterback. It felt like 80 or 90% of the time. Our linebackers were not good enough to get home when you called blitzes, especially in the middle, I felt like. And quite frankly, I mean, we've got some of these defensive linemen that don't crack the 300-pound mark. I mean, you're at like 275, 280, and you're going up against an offensive guard or an offensive tackle that's, 6'4", 315, 6'3", 310. Eventually, as they wear on you throughout the process of a game, when they're running the football and leaning on you, you're going to wear down because you're just not big enough. I mean, speed, athleticism. Santana Hopper is a freak when you look at what he's able to do at his size, the way he runs, the way he can jump. Like, the dude is a freak. If I'm not mistaken, in the preseason, he made the athletics like top 100 or 50 freaks list in college football. I think it's part of the reason he's in the transfer portal, but he had other issues of he's been kicked out of 2 or 3 games over the last 2 or 3 years. He was, that preseason video that made the rounds of the App player taking the helmet, hitting the guy in the head. Well, I can tell you who that was. So you see what I'm saying? Like, there's just so many things this defense that frustrated me. I mean, I was frustrated with the offense too, like a lot of us were this year, because this felt like another quarterback that has gotten worse the second go round in Ponce's system as we have progressed. Whether it was Joey, whether it was Bryce, whether it was Zach, it just felt like there was a drop off the second go round in Ponce's system. And so, at least with bringing in a new head coach, this means a new offensive coordinator. This means a new defensive coordinator. Most of the people that I talked to, and I talked to some people that are pretty plugged in with the program, there was a lot of people ready for Sloan to be gone by week 7 or 8. Like, let's cut the guy loose early. Let's figure it out. Let somebody else coach the defense the rest of the way. I think the defensive letdown was one of the biggest issues of the year, and one of the most disappointing things that App went through this year was the defensive issues with Sloan.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. So with all of the names that we heard in this coaching search, we heard, Woods, we heard Neil Brown, we heard, it eventually ended up being Loggains. Like, of all the guys we heard about, who did you personally want for App State's next head coach when this was all kind of unfolding? Like, we heard a lot of different names.
We did, and there was quite a few guys interviewed, from what I understand, that took place that were interested in this job. Honestly and truly, I was going to be happy with Neil Brown, because I felt like it was a spot where Neil could land and reassess, because regardless of how things went at West Virginia, Neil Brown's a good football coach. Look I think he was 32-8 his last 3 years at Troy, something like that, 30-something and 8. And we know how good Troy was those last couple of years when he was there. I thought the fact that he had been a proven successful coach in the Sun Belt at the Group of 5 level, I think it was the perfect place for him to land. Take 3 to 5 years and take Appalachian right back to where many expect them to be, and that's near competing for a spot in the Sun Belt Championship game in the East Division, before another Power 4 school came calling for him again, which, if he's successful, that's what happens. It's just the nature of college football that we're in now. And that was the guy that I was going to be the happiest with. Like, number 1 on my list would have been Neil Brown. And number 2, that's where it gets choppy for me, because the names I heard, nobody just stood out as a proven commodity at number 2. Number 2 was going to be, so I guess in a way you could say Loggains falls at number 2, because I would group him in with the Casey Woods and the Kirby Moores or whatever else, just because they're unproven commodities. Now, from a name perspective, you could rank 1, 2, 3, but as far as grouping them together, they're all there together. I felt like Casey Woods would have made a lot of sense, just because that App State connection with his dad, and the way that, again, that, like I've already said, the way that App likes to keep those connections, to the football program, to the university, when it comes to making their football hires. But again, it's not Neil Brown, so he's not a proven head coach. He's had one good offensive season at South Carolina, with Lenora Sellers. Again, I will state with Lenora Sellers, when you have a kid like him at quarterback, it makes life as an offensive coordinator a lot easier when you have a quarterback that is a dual threat guy that can do the things that Sellers does. Because you look at the other years, the offense in the SEC hasn't really ranked that well. It's been more toward the bottom end of the conference. But again, in this day and age, you pull a couple of big transfers, you get a difference-making wide receiver on the outside, you get, a couple of guys. The defense is, you got to address many spots on defense. God bless whoever takes this defensive coordinator position, because there's going to be a lot of retooling coming out of the toolbox with this. And I'll be honest, I don't think the quarterback that starts for Appalachian in that Charlotte game, first game of the season in 25, is on the roster currently. I don't think Billy Wiles, even though he's got the eligibility to come back, I don't believe Billy Wiles is the starter. We saw enough of that at Southern Miss before coming to App in the transfer portal. So I think they go to the portal for a quarterback. Who that could be, I don't know. I've been keeping a close eye to see if any of the backup quarterbacks that we don't really know about from South Carolina that have familiarity in Loggains' offense goes into the portal, because I think that would make sense from that kind of standpoint. If it's a kid who knows now for sure, like as long as Lenora Sellers is around and if he doesn't get hurt, then I'm never going to see the field. It would only make sense for you to follow your offensive coordinator, I feel like. But, so I'm curious to see, because there's a lot of retooling that has to be done, and because there's talent that went out off this team into the portal. Kanye Roberts has gone into the portal. Doesn't mean he can't come back. There's a chance that, Loggains picks up the phone and says, look, Kanye, we need you back, because we've seen that's been one of the more frustrating parts with this offense the last couple of years with Ponce and with Clark is running backs find their way into the doghouse very easily at Appalachian, whether it was Cameron Peoples, whether it was Kanye Roberts. Like, they found their way into the doghouse, whether it was a fumble here or a fumble there. You still don't take one of your best weapons off the field and put him in timeout for multiple games and for multiple series, because Kanye Roberts and Cameron Peoples are difference makers when they're on the field. So maybe Kanye comes back. I would like to see Kanye come back, because I think he can be a really good running back, especially getting him healthy. That's a main thing too, where he got hurt this year. But there was issues that before he ever got hurt, with him getting on the wrong side of the coaching staff. And so I don't know. There's just so many guys, that have went out on this offense and on this defense over the last few days. It just feels like my Twitter feed is never ending of, oh, well, this App State player's in the portal. This App State player's in the portal. Loggains has got his work cut out for him, because there's a lot of reshuffling and retooling that's got to be done.
And, on top of that, you just have all of this kind of unknown, especially even with Loggains, and you don't even really know kind of what you're getting from him. I tweeted this, frankly, like my personal reaction, putting the fandom stuff aside, was like he basically, like what you said, he had Sellers, and Sellers has shown to be incredibly dynamic. And again, my dad went to South Carolina, is a Gamecock fan, like has been his entire life. And he texted me when App hired Loggains, and was just kind of like, he was like, good luck to him, I guess. Like, that's kind of been the overall sentiment from South Carolina fans that I've seen, has not been, oh no, we lost this great offensive mind that we don't. In fact, they've been like, great, let's get Shula, the quarterback's coach, promoted, and so we don't lose him, has been the main thing. Or, sayonara, best of luck with your future endeavors. Not like, oh man, like this is gonna be a huge blow to us, we don't know how to replace this production. Loggains, to me, what I remember him from was being Mike Vrabel's offensive coordinator with the Titans. And I know the quarterback situation there toward the end of the Vrabel tenure was not good. Like I totally get that. The washed Tannehill into rookie Will Levis / whoever else years, those were some rough patches, and it's not really gotten better since. But I don't know, man. Like, this hire, to me, if I'm judging it as a totally like unbiased person, I'm like, this is going to be a big wait and see with me. So, good luck with that for App State, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people, because I seen somebody, they had post on Twitter, I think it was yesterday, who lives in South Carolina, works in South Carolina, and they said, we've never seen a fan base be so happy to see their offensive coordinator be sent off to be a head coach at this level. Like, it doesn't happen often. And there's where my red flags go up, is like, why are they so okay with losing a guy who gave them their best offensive season in half a decade or more? Like, there's just, I'm a heavy wait and see mode. I want it to work. I want it to be 3-4 years from now, we've won 1 or 2 Sun Belt championships. We're competing, to be ranked in the top 25 to end the year, with a group of 5 bid, to the college football playoffs, blah, blah, blah. That's how we want it to end. That's how I want it to end. But I'm in wait and see mode. I don't expect it by no means. This is one of those deals where it's like, we've got to see how it goes. And I'll be honest, I don't know that we can react to whatever 2025. If he comes out and goes 6-6 in 2025 and you barely get bowl eligible, or you go 5-7 and miss a bowl game in his first year, I don't know that I'm going to tell you I'm going to be shocked that is the case. It's not what I want to happen, because it's not what App State's football tradition is built on or what its history is. But I would not be surprised if we're sitting here 365 days from now and App either squeaked in a late season win to be bowl eligible, or they just missed the cut again, just because I think I could see a scenario where it takes him a year to really get his feet under him and readdress the transfer portal and everything else.
Mm-hmm. I want to pivot the conversation to another, what I felt was fairly underwhelming hire, and that would be at Marshall, Tony Gibson. Previously the defensive coordinator at NC State, where he was hot and cold at times. There were several years where his defenses were among the better in the country, but you look at this year, they've got 2 games where they allowed 50. My interpretation of Marshall fans' stance on this is that it is incredibly underwhelming. I'm very unwowed by it. This seems like a hire similar to Loggains, where the NC State folks are saying, don't let the door hit you on your way out. And I just personally don't love the hire. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it.
I'm not really a fan, to be quite honest with you. Sorry, I pulled this tweet up just because I thought it was interesting. So Marshall's football chief of staff, I just wanted to throw this in because we were already on Marshall, tweeted this out at 2:17 a.m. this morning, which is, a hell of a time to tweet something out. He says, "No, don't y'all pretenders," this is Sherrod Everett, "don't y'all pretenders try to jump on the bandwagon now. Remember when you gave up on our players and staff. Remember when you gave up on our head coach, Charles Huff. Oh, y'all quiet now." So I just thought that was an interesting tweet. Obviously, he was aggrieved by the reaction that the fans gave. I think last year with Fancher and that whole situation and how that played out, and how I think didn't Huff come out and kind of blame the fans for him transferring out and things like that. So yeah, there was a lot of like interesting things that all came into play there. As far as Tony Gibson goes, I think it's kind of underwhelming. It's not. If I'm a fan of a team that's coming off of a conference championship, it's one thing when you have to replace your coach if they leave for an SEC school. It's another when you're replacing a coach that's moving within the conference and replacing him with someone like Tony Gibson. And I would just say, and I know there's a lot of apparently bad blood between Huff and the athletic department or vice versa. I don't really know how all of that worked out. I would just feel shortchanged personally. And I know that they as Marshall fans, they want a coach that wants to be there. And I think that a lot of fans got the vibe that Huff simply just didn't want to be there especially the last couple of years. And they just both kind of felt it was almost like a marriage that was ending, and they both feel trapped, but they're hiring, divorce attorneys and they're trying to figure it all out. I just am like, Tony Gibson, for me, I remember when Georgia Southern was hiring a new head coach in 2016, coming off of the Willie Fritz era, and Tony Gibson's name was actually one of those that was in contention. Was he the one that I wanted? Absolutely not, because I personally wanted a Brent Pry or a Chadwell was in play at that point. He hadn't moved over from Charleston Southern. Tony Gibson, you look at his resume and you're like, yeah, but I'm pretty sure Dave Doran at NC State's a defensive guy at heart, right? So it's like, is it his defense? Is it, and Gibson was also the DC, I think, at West Virginia at the time when Georgia Southern eventually hired the dud that was Tyson Summers. But I was just like, even when I was looking at him at West Virginia, I'm like, I don't know, man, this 3-3-5 front they run, it's kind of gimmicky. Like, it works sometimes. And then other times, if you find a team that you can play against that can run the ball consistently, like, that can break that front. So this is another wait and see, especially with the number of players that are leaving. It's kind of the same thing as App a little bit, where it's like, you look at the number of guys in the portal, new coach, new scheme. Who knows where any of those guys, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which is his forte, kind of stand within that scheme? Does he want any of these guys back? Do they want to be there? So there's just a lot that's up in the air, and I'm just kind of meh. I think is kind of I think Southern Miss is ultimately the winner when it comes down to this musical chairs that we've had in the Sun Belt, because you get a proven coach who just won a Sun Belt championship with a team that could have easily been distracted and not played up to their full potential. And if anything, they did the opposite of that and actually, I think, played as good as they were above their heads. So I think that says a lot about Huff as a coach. So we'll see how it all pans out. But I'm whelmed. Let's say that. I'm whelmed with the Tony Gibson hire.
And Tony Gibson was a name that was in the running for the App State job at one point this week, too. I know he had turned Charlotte down first, as many guys did this week. And then he took his name out of the hat at App, too. And I got to believe, with the way the situation unfolded with Huff, you got to believe he kind of had the idea that Marshall was going to be the place he ended up. I would love to know if Marshall ever reached out to Neil Brown at any point during all this to at least say, you want to stay in the state and just come leave Morgantown and come to Huntington. What would it hurt to call? To check and see. But Southern Miss definitely won the cycle in the Sun Belt. They're number one, and you really don't know who to rank two. I guess you could say give the edge to Marshall since they just won the conference championship, give them the edge at 2, and then put App at 3. But they're both unknown commodities at this point. And, NC State's been a team that it's felt like the last 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years, how many times have we heard preseason like NC State's going to be one of those teams that can crash the college football playoff? NC State's I got a really good friend of mine who is a diehard, plugged-in NC State Wolfpack guy, and he's been a little skeptical. He even told me earlier in the week, he's like, I don't mind if App hires Gibson. Like, I'm not going to be upset if he goes necessarily, but when you've had guys too the last couple of years like Peyton Wilson, and you had just game changers and difference makers, it makes you look a lot better as a coach when you have guys like that on the field, kind of that same equation of, Sellers and Loggains. Well, Gibson had Peyton Wilson for, 2 out of the last 3 years or whatever before this year, but NC State has constantly underperformed, it's felt like, the past, 3 years. So I don't know. I'll be curious to see. I mean, again, who's to say at some point his relationship with the athletic department at Marshall doesn't get strained either. I mean, we'll reach a point with this thing at Marshall where it's like, okay, when do we start to see that it's not necessarily who the coach is, but where the athletic department and AD and things are, where it falls more that they're more of the issue than the coach they bring in.
Aikman, the funny thing is, and I said this, we had Noah Frary from the Frary and Smith podcast that recently ended on last week to kind of talk about all of these storylines. And one of the things I asked him, and I asked Zeke and Matt when we were doing the preview of Coastal Carolina, I kind of feel the same way about Tim Beck coming over on the offensive side of the ball. I was like, when was the last time NC State was appointment television that you felt like, oh man, their offense, I really need to see it? Like, it's just kind of been like, it seems like it doesn't really matter what quarterback they plug in. It's kind of the same thing on the defensive side of the ball. Like, no matter who you have, it's just kind of, it's all right. It's middle of the pack, no pun intended. And, it is what it is. Like, they're a perennial, 8-4 team. And if they get to 9-10 wins, that's one of the best seasons kind of in their program's history. And they're never really in contention for the ACC, no matter what kind of hype they get in the preseason. So it's going to be interesting to see if either of these Sun Belt teams get the better of the NC State hire, because right now it looks like Coastal's ready to get rid of Tim Beck, or the fans are at least, because they're already fed up. They were fed up with the Ethan Vasco situation. Both he and Noah Kim are transferring out. So I guess, what was it? Tad Hudson, I think, is the guy that all the fans think is going to be the guy there in Conway. We'll see how that all pans out, but it's been a rocky 2 years for, Tim Beck at Coastal. So it might kind of be a little bit of the same with Gibson at Marshall, especially with the amount of players that are leaving.
Yeah, I agree.
Do we have anything else to hit on before we kind of get out of here? I feel like we've pretty well covered everything. Initial bowl thoughts, any bowl games that I really like the idea. If Braxton plays, I like the idea of the Marshall Army bowl game. I think that one could be fun. Other than that, like, I'm pretty whelmed with a lot of the bowl game matchups. We didn't get a lot of great ones. I felt like if Case Wheeler, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, just with the extra, the playoff spots, it really is watering down the quality of the bowl games as a whole, because now the premier bowl games are not going to feature 5 and 6. They're going to feature like 14, 15. Only 3 Sun Belt games have been announced at this point. One of them, Coastal Carolina, is staying in Conway, which is awful. I feel so bad for them. They're playing in the Myrtle Beach Bowl. South Alabama is taking on Western Michigan in the Salute to Veterans Bowl in Alabama.
Sure.
So South Al doesn't have to travel too far. And then JMU goes down to Boca Raton to play Western Kentucky, which could be interesting, I suppose, especially if Helton is staying. Yeah, if Helton's staying, that Western Kentucky team would be a fun matchup. And then we also have Georgia Southern playing Sam Houston in the RL Carriers Bowl, which I know, Brian, you're over the moon about.
I was just glad we didn't have to play another MAC school, to be quite honest with you. Like, the Buffaloes and the Ohios of the world, it's hard to get even excited to watch those games. Like, I know we personally didn't play well against either of those teams, but even when we lost, I just kind of cut the TV off and was like, well, that's over. And I just kind of went about my day, because it was, they play really close to Christmas, it seems like, every year. And, when you get 5 days away from Christmas, the last thing I'm thinking about on Christmas Day is, dang, I really wish we made that goal line stand against Buffalo. Sorry. So I was just glad to get a little variety because, God, I was afraid we were going to have to play Miami of Ohio or somebody like that in a bowl game. And I was like, I can't get my juices up for this game. And again, if Casey Keeler was still at Sam Houston, I think that would be a lot more of an interesting matchup. But who knows what that team looks like by the time they kick off. Like, I know Ohio beat us last year, but half that team transferred out after last year, and I had to write that was still when I was writing for Underdog. I had to write a preview, and I was like, I don't know who the hell's starting at quarterback. I have no idea who any of these people are. None of them have taken snaps this entire season. So I was like, I'm not going back and grinding high school tape. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just not. I'm not getting on max preps. Sorry.
Yeah.
So
other bowl games, we have Texas State versus North Texas, which may be a rivalry, possibly. We've got Louisiana TCU. Doesn't really move the needle for me. And then Arkansas State Bowling Green.
We did hear rumblings that Ben Wooldridge could potentially be back for that TCU bowl game. I tweeted out earlier from our account. I was just like, I'm not gonna watch. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna watch a third string quarterback take on TCU. I'm sorry. Like that one's a skip for me. So if Wooldridge is back, I will cut the TV on. But if it's Beal running for his life again, bailing out of clean pockets, I'm gonna stuff some stockings or do something else with my time around then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do we want to wrap it up? Zeke, you want to let everybody know where they can find you on socials, and then you could throw it to Aikman. He could do the same, and then we can get out of here.
Yeah. I'm on Twitter at Zeke Palermo, ZekePalermo. You can see it on the screen. Post about the pod there. Tomorrow, we're going to have a really exciting episode. We're going to have, for the first time ever, a Sunbelt player on the show, Bryson Broadway, who, first of all, might I add, like, that is one of the most quarterbacky names I've ever seen. Does not play quarterback. He's an all-conference offensive lineman for Georgia Southern. He's going to spend some time with us tomorrow at 8 p.m. again. Aikman, thank you so much for joining us. Tell the folks where they can find you and plug whatever you want, man.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. Always good to come on and talk App State football and Sunbelt football as a whole. You can find me, as it shows on the screen there, Radio Guy AC on Twitter. And I'll say this, Marshall and Army, I wish Braylon Braxton, I mean, I know he's in the portal now. To me, that's the best Sunbelt affiliated game is Marshall Army, because Todd Monken has done a wonderful job with Army this year. I love seeing a military school up high in the college football rankings. I can't wait for the Army-Navy game this upcoming weekend, because I think it's going to be a great game this year. That's always one of the fun games to watch every year, just because it's almost like a piece of 4th of July in the winter, because it brings your American out and you just see Army versus Navy, and it's like the 125th meeting between the two of them. So, I mean, it's go time when it's Army-Navy week. There's a reason they put a game like that on CBS, is because everybody watches no matter what kind of level of fan you are. So I'm excited that Marshall gets that matchup against Army in their bowl game this year. But hopefully it'll be a little bit better in Boone next year. I know between now and then, I'm sure as we gear up next season, we can come back together and talk. I'm curious to see what moves get made with App in the portal with Loggains coming aboard. And so we'll see if, I guess, basically some way to put this up, if he takes us to the danger zone or if we're cutting foot loose by the end of 2025.
No, we would certainly love to have you on the when we start to get into conference previews. We do the 2 teams at a time. We would be glad to have you on for the Appalachian State one, just to kind of when the dust settles, what the roster looks like, what kind of expectations are. Once you kind of get the feel and he gets roots down, and we can kind of see how all of that goes. As Zeke said, you can follow us on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Warm Weather Fans. Again, we will be back tomorrow night to talk with Bryson Broadway. Matt Miguez will join us. We'll get his thoughts, on the conference championship game. I'm sure he's personally disappointed, but, it kind of is what it is. You can follow me on X at Watch the Stone, as you can see on the screen. As always, we host these live streams over on our YouTube page. I will say this. The Bryson Broadway conversation will be YouTube exclusive tomorrow, so be sure to subscribe to our page, youtube.com/@warmweatherfans, all one word. Subscribe there. You can also turn on notifications for when we go live. It should be 8 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. This has been another edition of Warm Weather Fans. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and hope you join us again tomorrow night.